Antebellum Evangelicals and the Cultural Revival of Jonathan Edwards. Jonathan Edwards was a major figure in New England life in the 1730s and the 1740s. But his death was unheralded in his former parishes. Indeed, his former congregation, which had witnessed so much of his preaching and intellectual work, would in fact remove him from office over his stance on communion. As Joseph Conforti puts it, quote, exiled to the Indian mission in Stockbridge, Massachusetts, Edwards became a fit symbol of the way revivalism had moved from the center to the periphery of American church life. He was still considered a controversial figure when he died as president of Princeton University in 1758. 100 years later, Edwards was no more popular. In the words of R. Brian Bateman, the Edwards of history and the Edwards of faith, quote, for all his brilliance and alleged colonial typicality, Edwards had become an embarrassment to the Gilded Age Christians of his own backyard, a relic of a bygone age of religious barbarism and intolerance, end quote. However, even as New England ministers ranted and raved against Edwards and his ministry, others in America began to appreciate Edwards' work. As early as 1808, some of Edwards' written works were finally published in America. Previous editions had largely been published in Scotland, as there was such little interest in Edwards' writings and work in the home country. More or less, this time period of republication of Edwards' work corresponded with the Second Great Awakening, and many ministers were looking to the past for inspirations and perhaps even some guidelines for structuring their current earthly ministries. However, the 19th century was still largely hostile to Edwards. His Calvinist theology would continue to be stigmatized, and he himself would continue to cause controversy throughout the remainder of the century and even into the early 20th century. Edwards is most notably known for his sermon Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God. However, there was much more to Edwards than this mere sermon alone. Aside from this focus on the torment of hell in Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God, Edwards would reference the severity of eternal punishment in hell, but the week-to-week sermons given to his congregation were much more about love and peace, with a practical application of Scripture to avoid temptation and excesses in everyday life. The assertion that Edwards was a mere fire and brimstone simpleton began to be challenged by both minister and secular historian alike by the mid-1900s. R. Richard Niebuhr and A.C. McGiffert were joined by historian Ola Winslow, among others, but Curry Miller is best known for his efforts to rehabilitate the image of Edwards. Quoting Bateman again, quote, Miller's concerns, of course, were not religious, but intellectual. He sought to recover Edwards' incisive intellect and his profound sense of human limitation. The preface of his biography asserted the real life of Jonathan Edwards was the life of his mind. One of these results of this largely ahistorical approach was that Edwards emerged in Miller's scholarship as generations ahead of his time. End quote. Sadly, this approach came far too late among evangelicals in America. By the time the dust had settled on the 19th century, Protestants were in complete disagreement over Edwards' impact in American spiritual life, causing successive generations to avoid Edwards entirely in order to avoid controversy.